is Ron Comacho, host of the Business Hour on Fridays from 10 to 1.
Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the Business Hour. I'm Ron Comacho, your host, and today's business is the business of book writing, storytelling, the documentation of a man's great accomplishments, a baseball and sports love story, and a love story between a man and a woman, a love story about family and about the South, as well as other dimensions of American culture told by my guest, Bradsher Hayes, in a book about his grandfather, Arthur Brown Bradsher, and the book is entitled King of the Southern Diamond. Welcome to the Business Hour, Brad.
Thank you, Ron. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Brad, to set a tone about Arthur Bradsher, I want to start by reading a quote that that's included on the back cover of your book by former early turn of the 20th century coaching great, Coach John Heisman. And that quote is as follows: "Easily the name that shines clearest and brightest in this array of exceptional talent is that of Bradsher. This young man is beyond all questioning the most prominent player of the season. With most extraordinary ability as pitcher, he combines the advantages of being a good batter and base runner. Add these to a sunny disposition, a firm determination, and words of endurance, and you understand why he has been able to place himself head and shoulders above all other pitchers of the year. And I would have him as captain of my team. He has the bearing of a gentleman, forbearance of a true sportsman, and the ideal temperament of the fighting athlete, ever determined, never dismayed, always strong, with a persistent smile to help out. As a captain, he would be a credit and ornament to any team." That is 1905, and that's a quote from John Heisman, namesake for the Heisman Trophy, and those are quite lofty accolades. So, with that in mind...
Well, they had a very special relationship, and they had a very high mutual respect for each other. And it's really a little bit rare sometimes for an opposing coach to speak as much about Bradsher as Heisman did, but they really did have a very high mutual respect for each other.
Yeah, and that developed over the years. Obviously, Heisman had been eyeing Bradsher and his accomplishments, and in 1905 felt like he could characterize Bradsher in the way that I just read, which again, that's a quote from the back cover of your book. Up in the front of your book, there's another quote that's very, very brief, and to me, for aficionados of the sport of baseball, this will be very clearly understood, and this is the quote: "Love is the most important thing in the world, but baseball is pretty good too."
Yogi Berra.
The great Yogi Berra, a modern American philosopher. Now, with that, I want to ask you, and you offered to me prior to today a short description of the book, a really short description of the book. Give that to me again.
Well, if you want the short version, it would be Love, God, Baseball, Family, and Adventure. King of the Southern Diamond touches all the bases.
Now, can you expand on that? And I want to set it up in this way. And listeners of the program have heard me say this before. It's not as if it's an elevator speech, that 60-second elevator speech where you summarize the features and benefits of anything. It's more like we're at a cocktail party. And I turn to you, Brad. You know that you don't have a lot of time. There's some more interesting people you want to talk to. But I seem interested in your book, and I ask you, well, Brad, beyond that little short description, what is that book about?
Well, it's a great untold story, which really are the best kind. But it's most people that look at the cover think it's just about baseball. Well, he had some extraordinary accomplishments in his baseball career, and Heisman called him the best player in the country in his last year. But the book goes well beyond baseball. It's a beautiful love story between Arthur Bradsher and Lizzie Muse. And he was very deep-rooted in family and was a great, loving husband, father to his children, and grandfather, and had a 100-acre farm at the end of his life for 6 years that all the kids went to for the summers. And that's where the adventure comes in.
You know, this could also be characterized as a book about a great Southern gentleman, a great American who led a really full life, who did some really good deeds, who had some really key relationships in his life, from players that he played with to Lizzie Muse, who you mentioned, who became his wife. And then there's a baseball story along the way. There's this baseball story about a man of significant accomplishment as a baseball player. But there's a lot of other dimensions that you characterize in the book, and that's why we can refer to it as a love story of a man and a woman, family, Southern culture, baseball, and sports. Now, how did you conceive of writing this book, Brad? Because you didn't know your grandfather real well. I mean, but nevertheless, at some point in time, you thought, "Hey, I want to learn more about him."
Yeah, and then it really, in writing the book, it was kind of done in reverse. Most people say, "I want to write this book," and proceed on to doing the research and to write it. I wanted to get to know my grandfather that I had never met in my life. And so I initially started going to Duke University, asking for some information from them. But then I went to the newspapers, and by golly, I found 350 newspaper articles about him and Lizzie Muse. And they went from baseball, his personal life, his business. The articles described his nature, that he always had a smile on his face. He was really a gentleman, and they described that in these newspaper articles. And after 2.5 years of research, or 2 years probably, I said, wow, there's a story here. And so that's when I began to write the book. And along the way, I got a lot of help from, my writing. I joined some writing circles and just got a lot of help along the way in writing the book, because it's my first book.
Yeah, I think you've done a wonderful job, and you either instinctively or someone cued you to seek the support of other writers. In fact, Valerie Love, who was a previous president of the Atlanta Book Club, has been on this program.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you acknowledged Valerie in your book, and you and I hadn't talked about that. And then there were some other folks, and we might be able to get to that a little bit later. I want to clarify for anyone who, and certainly this is something that you had to work out in your mind as the story unfolded. This was a puzzle to then be reassembled, even though there were lots of articles that you could draw from. there's a great deal of research that is an accurate depiction of the man and other characters, real people. But there's some embellishment in terms of there's dialogue that you would have included so that you were reading between the lines. And consequently, I think it's a really beautiful narrative, nonfiction, but with some elements that were reading between the lines, so to speak, and then told by you in the form of dialogue. And you become more familiar with Bradsher, Arthur Brown Bradsher, when you paint that historical account of him, and then you took some literary license in describing the settings, the scenes, the dialogue, based on actual information, and you undertook many, many hours of research.
Yeah, well, a lot of, for instance, the first page of the book, when it starts out, "Stop that train, stop that damn train, boys." Well, that actually happened. The train going to Mercer for one of the most famous college games ever played. They called it the Miracle of Mercer. Their train was a half a mile down the track. And that really happened. It was in the newspaper, and it was in the letter from my grandfather to W.W. Card, reminiscing about that crazy scene, because if they missed the train, they would have to forfeit the game. And in that game, he struck out to 22 batters and pitched a no-hitter. But beyond the newspaper articles and diaries and letters, a great part of the book in basing those conversations and narrative, as you say, were based on excuse me, actual conversations with my mother, with my sister, who's 81, God bless you, Liz. And Liz and I spent hundreds, if not more, hours talking about her memories of grandfather, the farm, what a gentleman he was, what a gentleman, that he always was there for them. So I think one of the richest parts of my writing the book were leaning and gleaming those conversations with family, cousins, and hearing what they said about Arthur Bradsher and Lizzie Muse. She was quite a gal.
You know, when you read that section on stopping the train, and I won't have you read because, which I will do with some other parts of the book, but it's a very descriptive scene, and in fact, as it unfolds, you don't really know if they're going to catch the train, and I'm not going to give it away. You read the book and you'll see whether or not the ball players catch up to the train that's leaving to head to Mercer, which, had they missed a train, which they might, it could be disastrous because they would have been late for that famous miracle at Mercer.
Yeah.
We're going to be taking a break, Bradsher, and you'll notice that my guest, Bradsher Hayes, shares the name Bradsher with Arthur Brown Bradsher, who we've been talking about, and the book, King of the Southern Diamond, No Hits, No Runs, which Bradsher Hayes has written. We'll be back to talk with Bradsher about King of the Southern Diamond right after this break.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Mike Mizell. I'm a retired Army Colonel and president of the Johns Creek Veterans Association. We meet in Newtown Park, and part of one of our projects is the installation of the healing wall, the half-scale wall of the Vietnam Wall that traveled the United States. Well, it's coming to the West, and it's going to live in Johns Creek forever, the half-scale model. We're looking at possibly a March implementation of a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and we're looking for donors and sponsors that want to help us in this great project. You can donate at jcvets.org.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Have you ever wondered what doctors talk about amongst themselves? If you do, join us on the Doctor's Lounge and hear the doctors' conversations amongst themselves. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Hal Schertz, every Thursday morning, 8 to 9 a.m.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the Business Hour. We're here with Bradsher Hayes, author of the book King of the Southern Diamond, No Hits, No Runs. And it's a book about a very accomplished baseball player, a pitcher, and his relationships during the time of his life. But let me take a moment here. There's so many things that can be said very specifically about his accomplishments, but there's one section on a long list of his accomplishments that I want to read, and it says that Arthur Bradsher holds 11 single-season Duke pitching records, most strikeouts in a single season, which was 171, most wins in a single season, which was 13, most innings pitched in a season, 134, most games started, which was 14, most complete games in a season, which was 14, list hits given up per 9 innings, 2.95, or rather least hits, least walks per 9 innings, 0.29, strikeout to walk ratio, 40.25, whip, 0.425, shutouts 5, lowest ERA, 0.0746. He holds 9 career pitching records, career games started, career wins, complete games, innings pitched, fewest hits per inning, most career strikeouts, most career shutouts, most lettered in a single sport, and most years serving as captain. That's a lot, and that's just a portion of what you document and make available for readers.
Well, I found those statistics. I found Duke and W.W. Card, the athletic director, and a couple of people that wrote about him in the 40s said there were no records for 1901 and 1902. Well, I found but they didn't have the internet, and I did. So I found every game he ever pitched. And 3 of his records, I think, are very unusual. He pitched 58 games, and 56 of those were complete games. And in 1904, he went 13-1 and walked only 4 batters the whole year in 129 innings. I mean, that's just. And in 1905, he had a 0.74 ERA average. He also holds 3 or 4 NCAA records, which we're about to submit to the NCAA.
You know, there are a lot of folks who may not be aware that even though there was a lot of press generated at the time, I mean, the journalism community was in love with Bradsher. I mean, as you say, they characterized his demeanor as well as his accomplishment because he was just a good guy. He was a really good guy. He was polite. He was friendly. He was available to the press. And I wonder...
Well, you just gave him a great compliment, because that was in my notes, that he was a good guy. And that's what they said about Bobby Jones, too.
Yeah, and
he was a good guy.
And in fact, I want to say that he was, in some respects, like the Bobby Jones of baseball. And the reason for that, a Southern gentleman who was highly accomplished as an amateur. A lot of people don't know that Bobby Jones remained an amateur competitor. Bradsher was primarily an amateur competitor, and really he was sort of living in the shadow of some professional players. People know of Cy Young. Cy Young was more or less the same period of time, but he was the Cy Young of college baseball. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, he was. He was argued by some the best player in college baseball, or the second best. I think we've shown pretty clearly that he was the best pitcher of his time. He had a great career. I lost a little bit there.
Yeah, he actually was really dominant. During those years, 1903, 4, 5, he was overwhelmingly dominant. And I do want to take a moment to say that, along with a characterization of Bradsher as a gentleman baseball player with overwhelming accomplishments. He played at Trinity College, and I want to explain that you'll see Trinity mentioned, and for the purpose of this program, we'll be talking about Trinity College and Duke University, Trinity, Duke, and almost Trinity/Duke, because Trinity morphed into Duke. In fact, it was with key support from Washington Duke and fellow Methodist townsman Julian Carr that Trinity College, originally located in Randolph County, North Carolina, was moved to Durham, North Carolina, and it opened there in 1982. The Duke family continued its commitment to the institution in 1996 when Duke offered to give the college $100,000, which would be the equivalent of many millions in today's dollars, if it would admit women on equal footing with men. And the college promptly accepted the offer, making Trinity, which later became Duke, a pioneer in the South in women's education.
Well, he made that offer of what is the equivalent of $1 million, that he said, I'm taking it back if you don't do what I've asked you to do. And Lizzie Muse, Arthur Bradsher's wife and love of his life, was the 12th girl to ever attend Trinity, and she was, it said she was the youngest girl to ever attend Trinity. And they say Lizzie Muse was the prettiest and smartest girl in North Carolina. And I know she was the smartest because I got her transcript from 1902 from Duke University, and she took 7 courses and made straight A's and took 4 languages. That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. It was sort of an ideal, sort of a match made in heaven, if you will. And there are other dimensions to Bradsher's relationships that you characterize in the book. We'll get into this in a moment, but another such relationship was that of his relationship to his catcher. In fact, with all these different dimensions beyond baseball, as I read the book, it conjured up a little bit of the book The Natural, and maybe even more the movie The Natural, because as I was visualizing some of the scenes that you very nicely detailed in the book, I could see some pretty dramatic scenes unfolding on a screen, and I hope that you'll be turning this into a screenplay sometime soon, Bradsher. But it was reminiscent of Roy Hobbs, the central figure in The Natural, who also had a love interest in that movie, much the way that Arthur Bradsher had a relationship with Lizzie.
Well, Roy Hobbs also originally was a pitcher, and then he had an injury and he became a very prominent hitter. The Natural is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's a very popular movie. Excuse me for that. But they remind me of each other in the movie. Roy was very relaxed, very confident, always had a smile on his face, never showed negative emotion, but always seemed to get the job done. And that's the way I would also describe Bradsher. And Roy Hobbs was a folk hero. He became a folk hero in the movie. And Arthur Bradsher was definitely a folk hero in the South. People would get on trains for years and follow him all over the South to watch him pitch. He was a folk hero.
Yeah, he was a charismatic character. There's no question about it. He was so much more than just a highly accomplished baseball player, and that comes across loud and clear. You really did a great deal of research on the book, and along with the content of the actual book, I'm going to share a little bit about the mechanics of research and writing the book. That is research, the creative aspect, the actual taking those ideas and putting them down in writing, and the publishing of the book. And more recently, you've been promoting the book. This very program is helping to shed light on the book itself. But I want to talk about the mechanics of writing the book.
We could spend an entire hour on that, but I think the first thing you need to find is a subject that's going to be a popular subject and that you have a passion for. And I did, the majority of my research through the newspapers, and as I said before, found 350 newspaper articles. But, every piece of information, even as 5 weeks ago, I had been told he was chairman of the board of the YMCA in Montreal, and I called them 2 years ago and have never heard back from them. But I put YMCA Montreal Bradsher, and I got a big article that sprung up, which is in the back of the book. But as I mentioned before, the best part of doing the research was conversations with people. But what I would like to offer, I spent almost 4 years going to writing classes, and I would like to pay it back. I'd like to put it out there for anybody that's writing or interested in writing to call me and join our writing circle and participate. And I'd like to offer that.
And you can reach Bradsher Hayes by going to www.arthurbradsher.com. They can go to that and
Right.
then
that's
contact you.
That's the website for the book, and also that's where the store for the book is. And to order a book on that store takes about 4 minutes.
Can they link to you as well? Can they
Yeah.
send you an email? All right, we're going to be taking a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the book, the process of writing the book, more about the man, Arthur Brown Bradsher, about his key relationships with people, which is a theme throughout the book. We're here with Arthur Bradshaw's grandson, Bradsher Hayes, and we'll be back with Bradsher Hayes right after this break.
If your health insurance premium is more than your mortgage, Ellen Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help. Whether you're a small business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email maga45cag@gmail.com and I'll respond with 3 easy questions to help you determine if you can get away from Obamacare. As a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry, I'm here to help with all your insurance needs. Email ellendeal at maga45cag@gmail.com.
Hi, this is Ron Comacho, host of the Business Hour on America's Web Radio. If you'd like to hear an eclectic mix of great programs, from relationships with Dr. Ann Schubert to homegrown veggies, and from classic cars to the Constitution, we've got programs for discerning listeners at www.americaswebradio.com.
Good morning. My name is Mike Mizell. I'm a retired Army colonel and president of the Johns Creek Veterans Association. We meet in Newtown Park, and part of one of our projects is the installation of the Healing Wall, the half-scale model of the Vietnam Wall that traveled the United States. Well, it's coming to rest, and it's going to live in Johns Creek forever, the half-scale model. We're looking at possibly a March implementation ribbon cutting ceremony, and we're looking for donors and sponsors that want to help us in this great project. You can donate at jcvets.org.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the Business Hour. I'm Ron Comacho, your host, and we're here with Bradsher Hayes, the grandson of Arthur Brown Bradsher, a highly accomplished baseball player and Southern gentleman who in his lifetime did some really good deeds. And so in learning more about his grandfather, Arthur Bradsher, or rather Bradsher Hayes, wrote the book King of the Southern Diamond, No Hits, No Runs, which characterizes the way that he pitched. He oftentimes had no hits and no runs scored against his Trinity Duke team. I want to read another quote here from John Heisman. If anyone had told me before the game started that any college pitcher could, in the space of one game, strike out 16 of my men, I would have called him a complete fool. Now, Bradsher.
So he continues, and he said, if there's one thing I can do is teach a man how to hit a baseball. That's the end of the quote.
And so he felt that he personally was affected by the ability of Arthur Bradsher to strike out his men who had been coached by him to hit a ball. And
he made that quote right after the game that was called the greatest game ever played in Dixieland. And not to ruin the story, but Bradsher lost the game in the 12th inning. He struck out 16 batters. He hit 2 doubles. He had 10 assists, which is amazing for a pitcher to have, and gave up 3 hits and lost in the 12th inning.
And who was that game against?
Against John Heisman and Georgia Tech.
That's right. And so
he made that quote to the press right after the game.
And the reason I ask is because I want to take a moment for you to explain, because I think the overwhelming perception of John Heisman is as a football coach because of the trophy that was named after him. Can you give us a little bit of clarification of just to what extent he was a great baseball coach and may have been a more winning baseball coach than he was a football coach, and how the trophy came to be named after him?
Well, very few people realize that Heisman was also a baseball coach at Clemson and then at Georgia Tech, and he won 220 games in baseball and several championships. And of course, at the same time, he won 33 straight games in football and was a national champion in football in I believe it's 1917, and won the SIAA baseball championship in 1906. The Heisman Trophy came about, and I believe it was a year after he died, which I believe was 1936. I stand to be corrected, but it was a trophy given by the New York Athletic Club, and the year after he died, they changed the name of the trophy for the most outstanding college player in the country to the Heisman Trophy. Which is still awarded today.
Right, he could just as soon have been the namesake for a baseball trophy. He could have gone the other way. Now, Brad, you, along with researching information that was available, much of which was online, and getting information from the Duke archives, you conducted a lot of interviews or had interaction with family members because you had to draw upon their knowledge of your grandfather. Tell us a little bit about those contributions.
Well, I've touched on it a little earlier, but we 20 of us all spoke and got together as far as what stories they had about grandfather. And one cousin said, I remember the day we were going down the road to the country store, and he stopped and he clipped off a piece of willow, and he took out his pocket knife and carved a whistle. And he said, I still have that in a little box on my table today. But, there was a story here, a story there, almost a story everywhere. And like I said before, I spent several years with Liz, my sister, almost every night discussing things that she remembered about him and the family during those years, and especially those years at the farm during the summers for 6 years at the Neuse River in New Bern. So that's where a lot of the stories came from.
The book is so much about his relationships with many people, Lizzie Muse, as you pointed out, but also Chadwick, who was his catcher, was probably his other closest relationship during college and beyond, and he was such a supporter. He believed so much in Arthur Bradsher that I'm sure it had to come as a tremendous source of moral support, and not only technical support. I mean, not only did they spend hours working together and were almost on a telepathic brain wavelength, of course they had signals and strategies, but I want you to read a section here about what Chadwick once said in the course of a game.
Well, catchers are intriguing, and first of all, any mother that has a son that's a catcher should buy this book. Just to read about Chadwick. He was something else. He was a little bit of a rebel. He was absolutely, totally different from Bradsher, who was very conservative. But between the two of them, when they were battery mates or in a game, and the word battery mates in the glossary at the back of the book for some of y'all. They went 28-3. So catchers are very intriguing. They're one of the greatest parts of baseball, at least my history in baseball. So the game's about to start, and the umpire has screamed, "Play ball." So the camera pans to Chadwick. Chadwick was in a crouch position, ready for the start of the game, when the umpire bent over the plate to brush it off. His rear end was pointed in the direction of the pitcher's mound, and he found himself looking into the backstop stare. The two sets of eyes were less than 24 inches apart, so close the catcher could smell the tobacco on the ump's breath. Chadwick reached towards the plate with his index finger, tapped it on the edge. "Mr. Williams, my boy Bradsher is going to put his balls on the black edge all day long." "I hear you, Walter," he said with a grin. And the black edge is the corner of the plate.
And we talk about painting the lines and pitching on the edge. And by the way, I might add that I think it was just a really cool dimension to the book to add the baseball glossary. Did you realize as you're writing the book that it might be helpful to readers, especially although there may be a great number of baseball fans who get wind of the book and buy a copy and are attracted to a story about a baseball player, there'll be a lot of sports fans that aren't particularly baseball fans, and there'll be a lot of non-sports fans, I would say.
Well, the glossary can be fun. I mean, it could be for housewives, it could be for men that just don't know all the terms of baseball but love baseball. And, you know, a housewife can say to her son, or a mother can say to her son, "How'd you do today, son? Did you hit a blue darter or any frozen ropes?" Well, y'all going to have to go to the glossary to see what those mean. One of the most famous terms in the glossary is can of corn. And when I played, and it's still true, if anybody hits a lazy fly ball straight above a center fielder, he doesn't move an inch, and it just comes down in his glove, we would yell, "Can of corn." And it came from the early 1900s when a man or woman would take a broomstick in the 10-foot-high pantries and tap a can of corn, and it would drop down into their apron.
There are phrases, sayings, descriptive terms from the previous turn of the century, but many of those remain, the vast majority remain today. You know, you can learn some things about current baseball nomenclature by going through the glossary that Bradsher Hayes has compiled. We're going to be taking another break. We're reaching our last segment. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about more about the book, but also a little bit about you, because you played baseball. We want to know the origins of your love for the game, which may or may not have begun before you began to play the game. We're here with Bradsher Hayes, author of the book King of the Southern Diamond, No Hits, No Runs, and we'll be back with Bradsher right after this break.
You know, I got to throw in, just because we're doing it, and you brought up the fact, Ron, of can of corn or whatever. Right now, if you go to our website, we're scrolling that you can put in your idioms. I love idioms. Like you may be the ones that the family, the uncle, the cousin, or whatever always had a saying. You know, you're about as worthless, or you're about as good as a screen door on a submarine. Yeah. Or my grandfather had one. Well, Tom, how you doing? Well, I'm like a I'm like a woman in a hobbled skirt. I hadn't got much room for kicking. So anyway, we're putting it together. I love idioms, and if you've got one, send them in to America's Web Radio, and we're going to be working with a publisher to take some of the ones that we think are the best, and we'll be in contact with you as well if you want to put your name with them. If you don't, that's fine too, whatever you want to do. But I just thought it was funny that you brought that up, and we started this several days ago, as a matter of fact, and want to remind everybody that you're listening to America's Web Radio, and we'll be back right after this.
Want to give your family or loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the tornadobodydryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat air massage it gives me after my shower. The Tornado Body Dryer is super. You'll love it, and you'll love having one in your shower.
This is David Donaldson with the Atlanta Healing Center, conveniently located in Lawrenceville, Georgia. At AHC, your success is our goal. Addiction recovery is about more than just not using. It's about becoming a whole person and addressing all aspects of your physical, psychological, and social needs. Please call us at 770-696-9862, or you can reach us on the web at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
My name is Kyle Hayes, a motorsports student at Alfred State College. Every year, Alfred State students compete in the Great Race, which is a cross-country time endurance rally for vintage vehicles. As you can imagine, it's pretty costly. I'm asking for your help. Your donation can make it possible for these students to live their passion and promote the vintage automobile industry. Please visit our site at give.alfredstate.edu and search Great Race to learn more and help us reach our goal. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the Business Hour. We're here with Bradsher Hayes, and Bradsher has written a great story about a man of significant accomplishments throughout his entire life, but with a focus on the years that he spent at Trinity College, which became Duke University. The book is entitled King of the Southern Diamond, and you can learn more about it. Go to www.arthurbradsher.com, and you can also get copies of the book. One thing about Arthur Bradsher was that he really was the most prominent figure in athletics at Trinity College, which became Duke, for a variety of reasons. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, baseball at that time was where it was at. I mean, it was the game that everybody played. At Duke, basketball didn't come into being until 1907, and football was banned. So the president of the school told his athletic director, W.W. Card, when he came in the fall of 1902, "You see Bradsher today, because he is the face of our school. And people look at him because of his accomplishments, his character, his integrity. He was a cum laude student. And so he really was the face of Trinity during that era.
We talk about the relationships that Arthur Brown Bradsher had with key people in his lives, Lizzie being one of them, Chadwick even before Lizzie Muse, who became his wife, with his family, his children, his grandchildren. In your chapter 16 entitled Best Friends, there's a quote from Aristotle: "My best friend is the man who, in wishing me well, wishes it for my sake." One of those people that was near and dear to him, again, is Chadwick, his catcher. And I want you to read a passage, because there was a point in time, and in fact there may have been many encounters with the journalism community, but after one such meeting with journalists, Bradsher turned to Chadwick and said this.
Well, they were walking back from the interview with about 7 or 8 journalists, and they were walking back to the train. It reads, as the two comrades left the journalist pool, Arthur turned to his catcher and said, thanks for what you said back there. You have always stood behind me and tried to help. You possess one of the greatest traits of being a loyal friend. What's that, Arthur? You always have my best interests in heart. You want what's best for me. I feel very fortunate to have a best friend in you. And I do have one quote. I'm told not to read in this interview, but I will read this one.
No, I think it's a great...
and it pertains to Chadwick.
Yeah, it's a great characterization of
there are a couple of relationships in life that are special. One is a man with his God, and the other is with the catcher with his pitcher, and they are both sacred.
Yeah, I think that it fits right in with a number of other quotes, like the Yogi Berra, love is the most important thing in the world, but baseball's pretty good too. Mm-hmm. It sort of captures the spirit of the feeling that many have for any given sport. In this case, it's baseball, and I want to talk a little bit about your relationship to the sport. When did you first become aware of the game, and was it love at first read, love at first sound of the game?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, it started playing single A baseball as a 6-year-old, and it's interesting. My father and I did not talk a lot about matters, and before he died, I sat down and said, "How?" Because I was a pretty darn good shortstop when I was younger. And I said, "How did I accomplish this?" And he said, "Son, when you were 3 years old, I would spend 30 to 40 minutes a day, and I would roll you 100 to 150 balls when you were 3." And the other person that was very important, it was my mother, and she drove me to every practice, every game, until I got my driver's license. And so I don't think Mom and Dad ever missed a game that I played in, and I played on 2 state championship baseball teams. I have to tell everybody that, and state championship basketball team. And one of your questions to me, and I'll ask it because we're running out of time, was about coaches. And I coached for about 8 years, and coached with some great ones, Bo Means and Ken Thrasher, and we won some championships. But a coach of mine just passed away, Emmett Wright, and he was a coach of our state championship team. He passed away at 93, and he was one of the finest coaches that have ever been. And I told his son, which I had written at our 50th anniversary, that I still had nightmares about Coach Wright's practices that were so tough. And he responded to Jimmy at 92 years of age. He said, "Well, Jimmy, you tell Brad I still have nightmares about some of the games he played." So,
you acknowledge a lot of the folks that were helpful in the writing of this book, and you touched on a couple of them. Tell us again, how did the local writing community help you get to a point where you had the confidence and were cultivating the skill to write this book?
Well, I mean, our writers group, we showed up every Friday, still do, for 2 hours, and we share each other's work and we critique it. We don't call it criticism. And you walk in, you think you have the best written piece in the world, and you leave with about 20 changes on it. So to be a good writer, you've got to be open-minded and not thin-skinned, and listen to what people's critique and make changes. And I was, I believe, willing to do that, and it helped me immensely. I'm a member of the Atlanta Writers Club, and George Weinstein, the president, has done a fabulous job in running that, as has Valerie, in putting together the programs that they produce once a month.
Yeah, tip of the hat to Valerie, not
and
only for...
that's how I got involved with one of the writers groups. Gilia was was speaking, and she invited 3 of us to join the Writers Circle, and that was 4 years ago. And my hat's off to her, and she's been a great part of my writing career.
Yeah, I was about to say hats off to Valerie for not only being an excellent writer, but also in her role as president of the local, is it the Writers Club, the Atlanta Writers Club?
Yeah. And like I said, I want to pay that forward. Anybody that wants to get in touch with me, I would love to help them as far as the writing goes.
You chose to self-publish in just a few seconds. Why was that?
Well, I think the book's right now worthy of an agent, but I self-published because I couldn't wait 2 years for this book to come out. The story was too good. But also, I've enjoyed it, and I'm going to keep selling it through my store and other people's places of business. They're Better Baseballs considering putting the book in their store. And so I'm learning the business for the next, but I've enjoyed doing the self-publishing.
Well, speaking of learning the business, you have been an accomplished real estate agent for decades, and you recently achieved a recognition from the Atlanta Board of Realtors. So you have a whole other career.
Well, I'm still practicing, and it's been 4 decades, not a couple.
No, I said a few.
Yeah.
And
so anyway, I just received an emeritus standing for 40 years in the real estate business.
Okay, we're winding down. What advice would you give to young aspiring writers?
Anything's possible. Live your dream. Get started. The hardest part of completing a task is getting started to it. Don't be afraid. Have confidence. And put a pen to paper and see what you get, and let other people take a look at it and give you some critique.
Pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard, either way. I like to do a little bit of both.
And I want to thank you. I mean, there are a lot of people that are important along the journey, and I want to thank you for helping me get the word out about the book today.
Well,
it's been a pleasure.
You're entirely welcome, Bradsher. I think you've done a great job. We have been talking with Bradsher Hayes about his book, King of the Southern Diamond. Thank you so much for being on the program. You've been listening to America's Web Radio here, 10 or 11 a.m. Eastern Time in the USA. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on the radio next week.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Where to give your family